For the first time in 44 days, the capital city of Ukraine, Kyiv, came under significant Russian missile attack last night. Now, many of the missiles were intercepted by the Ukraine side, but not all of them. And in fact, many of the ones that were intercepted, as a lot of the video footage shows, were knocked off course and then fell in civilian areas. Some of the shots that we're going to throw up here in just a minute, you're going to be able to see, some big craters in the middle of a street. So it obviously wasn't a targeted thing. They didn't intend to just blow up nothing in the middle of a street. Some of these others, like the one you're seeing right there on the side of the building, there's not a lot of damage to the building itself, just some fires that were starting because not the rubble, but the wreckage of these missiles, once they're intercepted, then lands on some of the buildings, and then there's lots of fires. That was actually throughout Kyiv, but it was very scary for a lot of the residents, and they had to go into subway systems for bomb shelters for the first time in a long time, and it really put a lot of fear into the Ukrainian people. Now, let me give you a little bit of the background on what's going on here and why this is happening. Russia had been, you may have heard, like last month especially, lots of news about many Russian aircraft getting shot down at the front. There was like 10 in a span of like 12 to 15 days. It was one of the most high number of Russian fighter jets to get shot down in a long time. And part of that was like people were celebrating and saying the Ukraine side's getting better. Well, there were two reasons for it. Number one is that Russia has substantially escalated the use of combat aircraft and fighter jets in coordination with their ground assault, firing what they called FAB bombs. There's different varieties. It's, I think, 250, 500-pound, 1,500-pound bombs, I think, have been used in a couple of cases. But these are basically old-style Soviet bombs that have been equipped with glide equipment that basically turns a dumb bomb into a smart bomb. We have done that in the United States and given some of those to Ukraine as well. We've done it many years ago, and Russia finally figured out their own technology, so they do it. Now then they're using them in much higher volume on the front, and these are substantially more powerful than any artillery or drones that have been fired. And of course, both of those categories continue on. Well, so Russia started doing that a lot, and that's one of the things that helped them capture Avdiivka a month or so ago. Because of the use of that. So to try to battle that, the Ukraine side took some risk, and they repositioned much of their air defense forces from some of the western areas around Kyiv, around some of the other major cities, to the front line so that they would be able to interdict them, because as has been the case for quite a long time, Ukraine doesn't have enough air defense capacity at the tactical level where the line of combat is, as well as the strategic areas in the rear to try to protect the important cities. So they thought they would do that. Well, it turned out there was some success because they did get 10 jets. Now, of course, Russia has about 1,500 combat aircraft, so that's still just a drop in the bucket compared to what they have, but it is still not a small issue, because I think Russia's total capacity right now is about building 12 combat aircraft per year. So it's a pretty slow process. And when you knock out 10 in a month, basically in a month, then you knock out almost a year's worth of production just to try to replace it. Here's the additional problem. There's two more. First of all, there was some really big issues that Russia, aware of this, and this was probably part of their plan. They were probably baiting the Ukrainian side to move their air defense systems away from some of the major cities. Were on the lookout for them. So they have reconnaissance drones that are not armed, but are looking for things on the ground that move around. And they several times in the last couple of weeks found major air defense systems on the move and blew them up on the road, to include 2 Patriot launchers, most famously. And of course, it's just really hard to do with those, because those are some of the best. They also had some S-300s. So at least 4 separate occasions that I'm aware of, the Russians found them moving and knocked them out. Some others were also found just in their firing position. So that continues to degrade, even at the tactical level, the Ukrainian capacity to do air defense, which has always been a weakness of theirs. Now then, because they had been moving away from their strategic targets around the capital city and elsewhere, they're more vulnerable. So probably this was a big test for Russia, because it was, like I said, it's the first time in a month and a half that they have launched anything into Kyiv, to see just how, robust it is there. I would expect that you're going to find some others in some other areas to also test where the systems are, because once Russia finds out where they are, they can find out where the holes and the gaps in the coverage are, and then you can probably expect to see more on that. Simultaneously, it's also an indication that Russia may be preparing for its next offensive. The British the British intelligence over the last 3 or 4 weeks has been releasing warnings that the Russian side has been massing troops for one of a number of major spring offensives, sometime in the May-June timeframe is what they're looking at right now. Probably. They don't know for sure when that may happen, but they see the capacity for it is there. Now, as we've been talking here, Russia is tactically on the offensive all across the line of contact already. And they're moving forward. They took Avdiivka. They took some of the cities around Bakhmut to the west of it. They're continuing to move literally all up and down the line to the west on a small scale. Now, lest anybody be confused on this, and we're going to be talking about this next week with Doug McGregor in more detail, but many in the West see the lack of large-scale movements and large-scale operations on the Russian side to be an evidence of weakness. But as it turns out, the most likely answer is that is a strategy by design, not to take territory in large chunks, but to destroy the Ukrainian army's ability to defend itself. And if you understand what their objective is, then you can understand that the bigger risk for the Ukraine side is a sudden collapse and breakthrough of the date, because if the defense gets weak enough at any point, then some of these big movements that apparently they have been preparing for and designing then could exploit those breaks and break through. The lack of air defense capacity, the lack of troops, the lack of ammunition, and all those kinds of things are all combining to make the Ukraine side weaker and weaker. And of course, nobody can keep their morale up forever when all you do is go backwards. And they have been going backwards for this full year so far, and actually going back even into the months before the end of last year. It's been nothing but a string of failures for the Ukraine side. They had, of course, all last year were promised that the summer offensive was going to push Russia back and go to the Azov coast and all of this kind of stuff, none of which materialized. So all these continual promises from the senior leadership of the Ukraine side never were realized. And in fact, the opposite happened. They failed in the offensive. Now then they're falling back further. And yet you still see, and we're going to show you here towards the latter part of this video, what Zelensky is still saying. And of course, this just undercuts the confidence that the people have in the leadership, the fighters who have to put their lives on the line, and they see that there's friends around them are dying by the day. It gets harder to do that when you see that the leadership doesn't seem to have a good plan and is not honest with the people. So why would you want to die for a lie? That's a bigger issue than some may realize. But in fact, talking about kind of delusional thinking and unwillingness to recognize what's really going on the ground, the United States. We talk about this too many times, and today is going to be the latest installment of that. And this is egregious and hard to watch. I'll just tell you. So in the last couple of days, there was a couple of contingents from the United States that went to Kyiv to reassure the Ukraine side that this $60 billion we've been talking about for many months, all the way back to September of last year, that they've been trying to cut loose and haven't been able to try to reassure them it's coming. And so they sent the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And so in different parts of the Capitol on over a couple of different days, they had several comments, some of which you've seen, some of which you may not have seen. Some happened actually today. We're going to be showing you those in a second. But one of the common themes you're going to see here is that we are still going with this delusional kind of spin strategy. If we just say it enough, it'll be true and people will believe it. Problem is, bullets don't care about spin. Bombs don't care about spin. They hit the ground, they blow up. They hit somebody, it kills them. And you can't spin that. And we're unfortunately going to find out, I think, in the next few days. First of all, let's take a look at Jake Sullivan, who was talking about how, you know what? Wow, this is a great one to start with. Russia's already lost.
We believe that Russia has already failed in this war. What did Russia set out to do? Wipe Ukraine off the map. wipe the very idea of being Ukrainian from history. It has already failed at that. It failed in its assault on your capital because Ukrainians stood up and defended the capital. It failed to crush the democratically elected government of Ukraine. It failed to crush the spirit of the Ukrainian people. And so the designs set out by Putin and Russia at the start of this war have not been fulfilled and will never be fulfilled. But that's not enough. In the end, we need to see a circumstance in which Ukraine no longer suffers from the threat and the onslaught of the Russian military, and where it can stand not just free and independent, but safe and secure as well. That's what we're going to work towards.
That's like, say, an NFL game. Kansas City Chiefs are playing on one side, and well, anyone else is playing on the other side. And the coach of the losing team that lost to Kansas City is saying, hey, Kansas City failed already. They didn't get very many rushing yards at all this game. They hardly had any rushes at all because they had Patrick Mahomes, who threw for like 1 million yards that game or something like that. You know, he's just dicing people apart in the air. So why do they need to run when they can throw the ball down the field and score, 45, 50 points or whatever? But you want to focus on this. And so, well, they already failed. Russia didn't already fail. Russia is succeeding on every capacity you want to even imagine. And on the battlefield and off the battlefield, strategically, operationally, tactically, every way you want to look at it, economically, they continue to succeed and to win, and our side continues to fall. Jake Sullivan can come in front of a camera, in front of a friendly audience there in Ukraine, and tell people all day long to make them feel better at the moment that, oh, yeah, that's right, they have failed. No, they haven't failed. Everything hasn't worked out the way they wanted to. They definitely have had some setbacks, but we're talking about the course of a war. And we're talking about the fundamentals that go towards who wins and who loses in a war. And those are overwhelmingly on the Russian side. Jake Sullivan telling people something they want to hear in Kyiv is not going to change that reality. Unfortunately, we have another visitor there from Kyiv today, and that was Lindsey Graham, who offered this gem.
Just admire what you and your people have been able to do for 2 years. I remember we were told Kyiv would fall in 4 weeks. We're still here, still fighting. Putin won in a landslide.
I'm sorry, Gary, can you pull out of that for a second?
You know why he got 87 votes?
I'm sorry, folks. I just don't pay attention to what Lindsey Graham says this time. I want you to watch across the table from him is, of course, Zelensky, who's smiling and doing this. Notice the guy to his right in this film, and that is the foreign minister, Kulebra. Watch his face throughout this. Listen to Lindsey, but watch his face in all of this. Go ahead.
Just admire what you and your people have been able to do for 2 years. I remember we were told Kyiv would fall in 4 weeks. We're still here, still fighting. Putin won in a landslide. You know why he got 87%? Because I guess he didn't want 88. That would look bad. So this is the 10th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea. So better days ahead for the people of Ukraine. And Putin will go down in history the way all the people like Putin go down in history. Just a matter of time.
So that is so bizarre. I mean, obviously, it's also got a soundtrack and a melodic kind of thing to make it sound like it's a movie, like a scene from a movie. Everything's good, but it's so bizarre because underneath that, those happy thoughts and images, you have Graham talking about how things are going pretty bad. That Russia has annexed Crimea. It's never coming back. That Putin just had this huge landslide win in his presidential election, showing that the people absolutely overwhelmingly throughout the Russia's 150 million-ish people are completely behind what their president is doing. Everything is strong over there economically. It's definitely strong militarily. Gary showed you some scenes earlier of their defense minister Shoigu looking at a lot of the bombs and stuff that the Ukraine side or the Russian side is making. They're just cranking this stuff off the shelves. And you see Kulebra there. He's got his lips are pursed, and he's like, he knows that what you're saying is nonsense, and this is not anything that's going to turn out good for the Ukraine side. So you just have this weird kind of dynamic that we're trying to spin things to make it sound good, that Zelensky's trying to spin things, because I think this was actually produced by them, not by the United States. So he's trying to put a happy face on this, and yet his own foreign minister is showing on his face what we show. What's on our faces, we're watching that. We're like, wait, everything he's saying shows how bad this is, but yet that's what we're continuing to do. Now, we continue on because let's go back to Jake Sullivan, because now he wants to turn his attention to some money, because cash, that's the deal. We need more cash.
I know there are questions here because of the back and forth in our Congress in the months that have gone by without the supplemental bill coming through, the package of aid that you rightly deserve and that President Biden is fighting for every day, the $60 billion that the Senate has passed on a bipartisan basis, and now we're working with the House to pass. But from our perspective, we are confident we will get this done. We will get this aid to Ukraine. And in the meantime, we're not just waiting. As Andre mentioned, just last week we announced from the White House podium a package of $300 million of ammunition, air defense, and other critical supplies that are needed right now on the front lines, and we are rushing those supplies to you as we speak.
Okay, context is important. That $300 million to regular people sounds like a lot of money. But when you think that in the first 18 months of the war, the United States and the European Union together sent somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 billion, $300 million is a literal drop in the bucket. It does nothing. And when you look at all the categories of things that were talked about that were provided as part of that, it's actually a pretty large diversity of things, which means you get hardly any of any item. It's just a handful. It literally will make no difference in even a tactical fight, a bump that you might see, but it won't actually change anything, even on a single tactical fight. So it's totally meaningless. And then he also says, but this, this other money is coming. He's still convinced, even though the White House doesn't control this, it's the Congress that does, and especially the House of Representatives, led by the Republicans, who have incentive not to want to do what the White House says. We can go into more detail on that later, but he's trying to convince them that this is coming, just hang on. But then you also have Lindsey Graham, who was also talking about this, and he said it the way only Lindsey can.
70% of Republicans in the Senate understand the need to help Ukraine, that if you don't stop Putin now, it goes further, that there'll be a war between NATO and Russia. If you don't stop him here, no Americans are dying. I think a majority of Republicans in the House feel the same way.
Okay, he has to go to there like it seems to always go. He wants to convince people, and I think that message was actually more for the Republicans in the House to say that if we don't get this money, then, oh my God, Russia's coming for us next. He's not going to stop. That. How many times have you heard that phrase? He's not going to stop. We have to stop him now. All of our, the Western security is tied up in this. I'm going to show you here in a minute where that's also being echoed by Zelensky. But look, we need to understand something. So that $300 million that just got sent over there, like I said, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to make any difference. But neither is this $60 billion. Now, we had Colonel Jacques Boyd about on a couple of days ago. I think maybe it was just yesterday. And I asked him about this very issue here because he's a former intelligence officer in the Swiss Army, worked 5 years in NATO. So there's nobody more understanding of how things work in the ground in NATO, how combat operations work, and how much money and things can operate. So I asked him directly, would this money make a difference on the battlefield? What do you say when you hear people say things like that? Will this $60 billion make a difference on the battlefield or not?
No. First of all, because those $60 billion, as you know, only a part of that will reach Ukraine, in fact, because most of that will be used to fund the provision of new weapons and pay people and all that. So only a fraction of that will reach Ukraine. That's the first point. The second point is that what we do is, in fact, just putting patches on a system which is dysfunctional because it was not designed that way. An army must be designed as a system.
There is no system in place. I have literally been arguing that from day one. when people are talking about that the Ukraine army would then rise up and stop first, well, it did rise up and stop the initial invasion, but then that it would rise up and drive Russia out. I argued from the beginning that's not the kind of army Ukraine had made. It had made a defensive army. It had spent all the years prior basically learning how to man trench lines. That's primarily what they did. The lines hardly moved for the 7 years prior to the start of this war. So they didn't have the systems in place. They didn't have the mentality, and they definitely didn't have the training on how to conduct offensive operations to unseat a dug-in enemy. And then when you try to start throwing this stuff on top of them in 2022 and then 2023 by just throwing a bunch of different stuff together and saying, yeah, we just need tanks and artillery pieces, like it's a category. Categories are important, but systems are crucial. It's not enough just to have some tanks or some APCs. You have to have a whole system that goes with it. And that system means that you have to have the troops trained. They have to understand how they conduct operations, and it has to be systemic. You have to have trained leaders at multiple levels to be able to execute those tasks that need to be done. All of that takes time that can't be shortchanged, and all of it takes a system of gear that all works together and is interrelated. None of that existed then. It bitterly failed, predictably failed in 2023, and it will never change now because if the conditions that were in 2023 did not work well for Ukraine, anything that may exist the rest of this year or next year will be even worse. So it's never going to be able to come. Second thing to understand about that is that everybody is so myopically focused on getting Congress to pass this $60 billion bill like that's going to make a difference on the battlefield. It won't. It'll help. I mean, anytime you get any more shells or any other kind of help when you're being pushed back like they are from the Russian side, of course you're going to want to do that. That makes sense from the receiving end. What I'm arguing is it won't change the dynamics. But what's also true is that that's not the end of the bill. That bill's that's a recurring bill, because even if you have this, I think they're calling it hold, build, and attack or something to that effect. So if they hold in 2024, build up the capacity throughout the rest of the year for an offensive, and then next year, then go on the offensive. That means point blank that this $60 billion bill is just the next one in line. So the $200 billion that has come from the cumulative West up to this point is bill one. This $60 billion is bill two, or actually three, because the European Union just approved $50 billion over 4 years. So it's not much per year. And then there will be for sure another large chunk before the end of this year to be able to fund the possibility for 2025. So guarantee you, no matter what anyone tells you, know for 100% certainty, there will be another much larger ask, because to build the offensive capacity is much more expensive than trying to hold the line what they have here. So more money is coming, and it will never stop. Literally, they're basically asking you, Lindsey Graham's, Jake Sullivan, they're asking you to perpetually, indefinitely, with no end date, to give $60 to $100 billion every year. And we just hope that it works out. There's no path. There's no strategy. There's no end state defined. There's no path to victory that they say, here's a plausible road and here's how much it's going to cost. None of those things. So here's your government claiming that Russia's already lost. He failed at so many things. This money is coming. They don't know either of those kinds of things. They're not true. But then they're not telling you the rest of the truth, which is the cash. We're going to keep asking you for it. And at some point, it's not just the money, even at that somehow they've got to be able to say, hey, and we also need, 900 or 1,500 or so armored vehicles. What are you going to operate with in 2025? They're losing stuff by the day. They, of course, they had just get crushed in the offensive last year, where most of the stuff we gave has been blown up and continues to get blown up as the days go by. So somebody's going to have to pony up existing armored vehicles. Is it going to be your stuff? Where's it going to come from? You see, that's an American one right there. Those things are blown up. Those things are gone. So they all have to be replaced if you even want to have the fantasy of another offensive. Where's that going to come from? So it's not just the cash, but it's also who's going to give it up. I mean, if all these people gave up all this other stuff in the West and they saw all of it's now hulking and burning on the battlefield like these pictures are showing here, who wants to give more up of that? Because everything that you give up weakens your national security capacity. Not many people are going to sign up for that. But above all, it's the manpower issue. There just aren't men. I don't care if you somehow do come up with 60 billion. If you do come up with another 100 billion later this year, I don't think that's going to happen. But if you did, you have a bigger problem, the manpower issue. Ukraine is struggling desperately to get enough people to just put in uniforms. Now, I'm going to show you a video that we found earlier today on our Ukrainian Telegram channel, because these are all over the place. This is every day I see these videos. We just pulled one today, which shows these so-called recruiters that go and just grab men physically off the street and put them in this van. You see this all over Ukraine right now. They're running because they know it's basically a death sentence, because they know, they've seen it, that people will get taken into by these people and get thrown on the front lines within days sometimes, or a week or two at the most. So they basically get no training at all, and many of them end up dying. And so they're terrified, but that's what they're having to do. You can't field an army like that. And what do you think? That fellow right there, what do you think he's going to do when he gets to the front? Do you think he's going to be one of those that, like, yes, I'm going to make myself an excellent soldier, and I'm going to train and study and, learn from the fellows around me, and I'm going to fight hard for my country? He didn't even want to be there. And you see the point here. You don't have enough men, and in those that you do are terrified, because they see all around them. They know that it's a death sentence to go there, and that they're not succeeding on the battlefield no matter what their leaders say. And in fact, what do their leaders say? Here we go from Zelensky. And I think this one's actually from today, if I'm not mistaken.
And our actions must be long range to defeat Putin, rather than being in a situation where doubts about the strength of the West benefit this lunatic. Putin must lose, and this is a matter of life and death for the democratic world.
Okay, look, I'm sorry. It's not about life and death for the democratic world. That's something Zelensky has been saying really since the beginning. Sometimes the Western leaders echo that. I think that's part of what you heard from Sullivan earlier, saying, they're coming for us next. And Lindsey Graham has said it plenty of times. They're coming for us next. No, they're not. Russia's not coming for us next. They're not going for anybody next. They said for decades that if you try to put NATO in Ukraine, it's a red line, and we're going to use force to stop it. In the year prior to the start of the war from 2021 on, Russia was very clear that if you don't reverse this situation, then we're going to use force. And he postured for it. He warned about it behind the scenes. He warned about it in public, and then he made good on it. That's what Russia wants. They want security on their border, and they don't want NATO right up to it. So he has no interest. I mean, just think of how irrational it would be for Russia to say, we're going to war to keep NATO out of Ukraine, and then we're going to attack NATO. Why would he? He's trying to prevent a war with NATO. So he wants a buffer state, Ukraine, that's neutral, which is all of their negotiations have always been on that point. That's what he's been trying to get. And so it would be irrational and illogical for Putin to then go and do the very thing that he is fighting a war to prevent. Now, you can say that many in the West are delusional, like the videos that I show you all the time, but you can't say that Russia and Vladimir Putin is irrational. You want to call him evil, you want to call him wicked because of the actions that he's taken, fair enough. Make that argument. But what you can't make is that he's irrational and that he's foolish and that he would do something that harms his own self-interest and harms his own security, when everything shows that he is laser focused on preserving his security. So Zelensky is wrong. Lindsey Graham is wrong. Jake Sullivan is wrong on all of these things. It is time to start recognizing this before it's too late. Now, there is a shred of hope that I can report to you this morning that I haven't been able to for a long time. It's still too early. These are anecdotal reports that I've been getting this morning from a couple of different sources. So I'm going to continue to follow this very closely for you, and we'll continue to bring this as it comes up. But there are reports out today that there was a recent effort, again by the Turks, Erdogan, to try to bring a peace proposal. And apparently it started to get some traction, that there is willing to something close to the proposal. They're calling it Istanbul 2, because Istanbul 1, as we've talked about many times here, they had the outlines of a peace negotiation in April of 2022 that could have ended the war then. Apparently the terms are very similar here, where it's a neutral Ukraine. The Donbas area would vote some distant period into the future, another plebiscite to where they can decide whether they want to go with Russia or where they want to go with Ukraine. There would be a demilitarization zone, et cetera. Those kinds of some of the basic outlines of it. We'll see where that goes. Right now, one of the reports I saw this morning said that actually the United States scotched it and said, no, don't talk about that. I pray to God that that part is not true, because if that's basically what we did in 2022, and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dead. Entire cities have been physically wiped off the map because of our unwillingness to do it then. And the danger continues to rise by the day, where people continue to die in Ukraine. More and more territory is going to be lost, and potentially their army could disintegrate and fall apart. And then there's no negotiations. Now it's just terms of surrender. Let's hope it doesn't get to there, but I'm going to do everything we can to highlight this and bring put a flashlight on it to illuminate it, because this is a great idea. This is the best chance we've had since April of 2022, and we want to bring some light to that. And so keep an eye on that yourself. Watch for the news on that, but we're going to continue to watch it for you. So that is our deep dive for today. We are unintimidated and uncompromised, bringing you the information that you need. Please like and subscribe and pass this to your friends so that they get access to the same kind of stuff you do. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.